What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our team mini-series. Today we are working on the Cleveland Browns fantasy implications for 2020. They finished in the AFC North at 6-10, but with the Bengals being in that division, they happen to be third in that division instead of fourth.
Woohoo.
Um, they had a very underwhelming, very down year by some standards. I mean, you went into the 2019 season looking at that roster, offense and defense, and thinking, wow, this could be the year that the Browns finally turn it around. And they didn't. 6 wins, very disappointing. And it really wasn't because, Mayfield didn't miss any games. They had solid receivers, solid running backs. We're going to talk about them, but it was super underwhelming, and also Baltimore kind of took over that division and ran away with it. But my projections on Baker Mayfield getting into the quarterback position is a little over 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, so a little less than what he did his rookie year. But they're I think they're going to be a little bit more run oriented, and Jordan's going to talk more about that. 145 yards on the ground with another 2 touchdowns on the ground there, so about 315 fantasy points. Puts him right in the middle of the pack there. I think that the Browns overall, I think they kind of got a reality check last year, and I think they're going to be better. A lot of their offensive talent is back, and they did improve actually, and we'll talk about the offensive line a little bit where they went with their first round pick. But Jordan, what are your thoughts on Baker Mayfield and his competition that he has at quarterback with Case Keenum now?
Yeah, I mean, I think Case Keenum's going to be starting from day one, and he should be, one of your top picks off the
Go out and get
board.
him right
But
now.
right, I mean, he's probably a great value pick right now. So, yeah, I mean, I've mentioned a few times to you, I'm all about head coaches, and I think it's the most important position in the NFL. And I think the Browns proved my point last season pretty well. Freddie Kitchens was not ready to be a head coach, and, that was very evident early on. And this is a team that's talented, and I think they just need a head coach that knows how to use that talent. So I can't say that's Kevin Stefanski 100%. We'll have to see how that shakes out, but I think I have a little more confidence in him than Freddie Kitchens. But yeah, I mean, Baker Mayfield, he was 19th last season. And my overall theme is this is going to be a run heavy scheme. I mean, last year, Kevin Stefanski with the Vikings, they had the fifth most rushing attempts, and they have a very talented backfield, the Browns. Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, is the best backfield tandem in the NFL. I have no doubt in my mind in regards to that. But I mean, this is going to be a run heavy scheme, so this isn't any knock on Baker Mayfield's talent. I like Baker. I think he has a ton of talent, but I just don't think his volume and opportunity is going to be there. We've seen it with Kirk Cousins and how Kirk Cousins managed that offense. He's been more of a QB 16, 17, 18. That's where Kirk Cousins is kind of floated in this offense, and I really think that's where Baker is going to flow. I don't care if he has Beckham, Landry, Hooper, Joku. I mean, he's got a ton of weapons. This isn't to say he doesn't have weapons. It's just a matter to me of how this offense is going to operate. And if Mayfield and this offense is to operate more pass heavy than I think it's going to be, then Mayfield offers great value right now. He's going right at that range too, around QB 16, 17, 18, right in that range. So he's going to provide some awesome value if they do become more pass heavy, but I don't expect that to happen.
And you already brought their names up, so that's what we're going to talk about next. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I think that these are the only two really worth it on the roster to be rostering. Obviously, if one of
Yes.
them goes down, the other one does get a boost, but then you might want to look into maybe Dontrell Hilliard, who saw some time last year. But there's really not
No.
much beyond these two that I would really trust. It's one of those situations where if both go down, probably don't want to touch the Cleveland Browns backfield at all. Nick
Nope.
Chubb, he's the better runner. Kareem Hunt is probably the better overall running back, but he's going to be there for passing downs. Again, he is back on a 1 year deal. Last year, I thought they were going to kind of just bring him back after his suspension and kind of run him into the ground and then ship him off somewhere, but that didn't happen. They brought him back, but now I think it's going to be that this year. Um, he is he's very talented. We saw it when he was with Kansas City. We saw it over the last 8 games last year. He he has all the tools to be a number one running back in this league, but he is battling for carries and touches with Nick Chubb. But they are both going to be fantasy relevant. We have both of them in our top 30 overall for the consensus rankings. Um, we're about the same, I believe, in our individual rankings. But you're taking Nick Chubb in the what are you taking late first, early second, and then Kareem Hunt
Yep.
around like the what fourth, fifth round.
Yeah, right in that range. Yep.
So yeah, I mean they're definitely both could be rostered. I probably wouldn't grab both on my personal fantasy team. I'd grab one or the other, but you could definitely make a case for both to get their points this year.
Yeah, and a lot of people are down on Nick Chubb, and I mean, I completely understand it based on Kareem Hunt being involved. But last season, when Kareem Hunt was on the field, so the last 8 weeks of the season, Nick Chubb was RB 15 and Kareem Hunt was 17. So, as much as people are scared off by Chubb being RB 15, really the difference was he had less involvement in the passing game, but he had more rushing attempts. So, really, it was just a trade off. And I expect this team to be more run heavy. So, I think he'll finish higher than that RB 15. I believe I have him at 10. And that's where he was in our consensus rankings, was number 10, I believe. So, I think Nick Chubb still has a ton of value in this offense just based on how it's going to operate. Same thing with Kareem Hunt. He's going around RB 25, 26 in most mock drafts. So if he finishes right in that range of RB 17, he has a ton of value where he's going. And, I can't stress enough, I really believe this offense is going to be run heavy. So as much as I wouldn't want to draft both of these guys, I mean, if it was the right value, I probably would, honestly, because we've already seen he was RB 15 and Hunt was 17 when they were playing with one another. So they both can provide value at the same time. That's not an overall safe strategy, and I don't think I'd recommend doing it. But if the value's there, drafting's all about value. So I like both of these guys a lot, and I think they're going to produce pretty highly in this offense.
All right, and then the reason they are going to produce is because that offensive line got it
Hmm.
got a ton better just over this past
Beefy.
offseason. Yeah, their first round pick this year at ninth overall was Jedrick Wills, who was. I mean, arguably he was the number one tackle, but Andrew Thomas ended up being the first tackle taken off the board. And then they also went out and got the top right tackle in free agency by taking or picking up Jack Conklin out of Tennessee. So I mean, the Titans' offensive line gets a little worse, and the Browns' offensive line gets a little bit better. So their outside is pretty much well protected, and that's going to be huge when they're going up against guys like T.J. Watt in Pittsburgh and other defensive ends that they have in their division. But yeah, I mean, I think like that. I mean, that just helps out Nick Chubb. That helps keep Baker Mayfield upright and able to get the ball out because Baker is a smaller quarterback. I mean, he's good on the run. He needs to move the pocket and get it to where he's got to go. His pass catchers, which we're going to get into next, are Jarvis Landry's a slot guy, route runner, who gets a lot of targets. Odell Beckham Jr. and I'll just go right into it now, I guess, because that's what I'm just talking about it. But Odell Beckham Jr. He's one of the best receivers in the league. Um, they Baker needs to get the time and get the ball to them and let them do their thing. We've seen Jarvis Landry catch over 100 balls pretty much almost every year since he's been in the league, with the exception of last year. Did he catch 100 last year?
I don't believe that he did.
Yeah, I mean, when he was with Miami, he was a consistent target leader and and reception leader too. So we know that he has all the talent in the world. Odell Beckham Jr., a high draft pick. Um, he's this is his second year there with Baker Mayfield and with the Browns offense. So it's those are your top two guys in the Browns offense as far as receiving the ball goes. Rashad Higgins, he adds a little bit there. He's probably going to be the third guy on the field. One of the sleeper names here is Donovan Peoples-Jones. I know you're a big fan of him. Probably have some more things to say about him than I do, so I'll let you talk about him. But he was their sixth round pick in this past draft. Going into the season or going into the draft with the kind of receivers that they had, you wouldn't think that they would be looking toward for a receiver in this receiver heavy draft because of Landry and Odell being on the team, but they still need a third guy there, and I think Donovan Peoples-Jones could end up being that guy.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And going back to the offensive line quickly, because I do want to touch on this. I mean, this just to me points of how what their plans are in terms of being run heavy. I mean, these are very strong run blockers. And one of the underrated signings they made that I wanted to mention briefly was they signed Annie Janovic, who is a fullback. He's one of the best in the league, actually, coming over from Denver. And he's a very strong run blocker. He's known as being one of the top lead blockers in the NFL. So once again, it just stresses what is this organization's philosophy now? It's they want to pound the ball. And so just going back to that. But in terms of their weapons, yeah, I mean, Odell Beckham's one of those guys for me. He's going to be overdrafted, and you're going to want to draft him really high because he's Odell Beckham. And this is, once again, it's not a knock on his talent. If you wanted me to list top five most talented receivers in the league, I would put Odell Beckham in my top five in terms of talent, with no doubts for me. Probably fourth or fifth. But this is, once again, it's going to be a run-heavy scheme. He's going to have less targets. Jarvis Landry is going to eat up all the targets for the short and intermediate routes, so that leaves Beckham less volume. Even last year, when you look at it, Jarvis Landry was the 12th wide receiver in PPR leagues. Odell Beckham was 25th. So, I mean, the trend was already going in Jarvis Landry's direction. So I think Jarvis Landry provides much better value in fantasy drafts. And Odell Beckham, there's still people that want to take him as a top 10 option. And I'm pretty confident saying I think it's going to take a lot for him to finish in the top 10 this year. I just think their passing attempts are going to be down. And, with Landry there, he's going to eat up a lot of volume as well. In terms of other, you mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones already. I really liked him coming out as well. He does make a little bit of sense to me. I mean, I could see him lining up on the outside across from Odell Beckham and then having Landry in the slot. So I think that's the long-term plan. He's one of those guys, don't draft him in a redraft league and expect him to produce. He's he's the definition of a taxi squad stash in dynasty leagues to me. So, and I really like him in that role too. So I think that he can start given maybe 2 years, I'll say. So, stash him with confidence and see what happens in that offense.
All right. Another name that we do, I seem to like a lot this year, going into the tight end position, is Austin Hooper. Coming over from a offense that did use the tight end a lot, and he was excellent there in Atlanta. I think he's just going to add. He's going to give Baker Mayfield another pass catching option. David Njoku, he has expressed that he wanted to be traded and get out of there, but as of right now, he's still on the team. Harrison Bryant, they drafted in the 4th round this year, so Harrison Bryant, I think, is really depends on what they do with Njoku. Obviously, if Njoku's there, you're not taking Harrison Bryant in redrafts this year anyways, whether Njoku's there or not. But in Dynasty, and if Njoku ends up getting traded away, or if he's let go at the end of the season, or even before the season starts, when they do roster cuts, Bryant could be a nice stash there. Hooper did sign for a hefty contract. I think it was for 4 years. So Hooper, as long as for the foreseeable future, he's going to be there. So you might have to wait on Bryant a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, and I'm probably going to be taking your point away, but I'm going to steal it here anyways. When Stefanski was with Minnesota, they had a lot of Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph on the field. We might see that this year with Hooper and Njoku, maybe some Bryant sprinkled in there too. But Hooper definitely is one of my favorite tight ends. He's one of my top targets that I'm looking for. I'm also looking at his replacement, but we'll talk about him when we talk about Atlanta. But he is. I think he's going to have a good year, and I think he's going to help out Baker Mayfield and help him progress in his 3rd year.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, this offense I expect to be 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, running back, fullback. I mean, just very, formations that set. Yeah, very traditional formation. So Austin Hooper is interesting. I mean, and I've mentioned this before with other guys' contracts. I mean, you don't sign a tight end for 4 years. I think he got close to $45 million.
Yep.
You don't give a guy that contract and not use him. I mean, if you're a general manager and you're making that kind of financial commitment to a tight end, I mean, he's going to be involved. Otherwise, you're going to have a very unhappy general manager. So I do think that they're going to use Austin Hooper, and he continues to fall in drafts, which is kind of interesting. When he was on the field for Atlanta the past 2 years, I mean, he was one of the most productive tight ends in the NFL. He's a guy he was really a top 5 tight end last year for Atlanta. I mean, he missed a few games, but points per game, he was in the top 5. So he's very talented. I do expect them to trade Joku at some point. I think they kind of knew that going into the draft. We talked about Harrison Bryant pre-draft, and he's a guy that does have some ability and some talent. He can catch the ball, and he does have some blocking ability as well. So I expect him to be a nice dynasty stash. Not that he'll ever be overly involved, because he's always going to be the second tight end as long as Austin Hooper's there.
Mm.
Unless Austin Hooper falls off the face of the earth, he'll have limited value. I'll say if you're in a tight end premium league, he might be a guy you look at a little more. But Joku, I'm not necessarily touching. Even in two tight end set, like I said, I mean, this is going to be Austin Hooper's spot, even if they're playing two tight ends. Joku's a talented pass catcher, but based on the reports that I've read, it seems like he really wants to get out. I think he wants to be the man. I've seen some reports of him going over to the Patriots, which I think makes too much sense. But yeah, I mean, Austin Hooper, he's going as the 12th tight end off the board right now. And it's funny, from a guy that produced as a top 5 fantasy asset in an offense that should be very friendly towards what he's doing. People just seem to be disrespecting him for whatever reason. So, we talk about all these sexy names at the tight end position, and then Austin Hooper just continues to fall further and further down the list. And the more he falls, the more I'm in on him. Earlier this offseason, he was going around tight end 7, and when I'm in that spot, I'm like, I don't really want to commit to Austin Hooper at that spot. But once you're talking about the 12th, 13th, 14th tight end off the board, I think that's great value for him.
Yep, no doubt about that. Every episode, I like to sprinkle in what the kick returners and punt returners are. In Cleveland's case, it looks like they got a handful of guys, and the main one is one that's already going to be drafted in every league. Jarvis Landry. He has returned punts in his career, and he did last year with the Browns. So really not any kind of advantages that you can get there, because none of these other guys you're really going to be having in your starting lineup or even as a flex play. But Jarvis Landry, he adds a little bit of value if you get any punt return yardage and or touchdowns in your league. As far as the kicker goes, Austin Sabert, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. The offense is really good, so he's definitely going to get some opportunities to put the ball through the uprights. Most of his games are outdoors in the northeast-ish, so who knows? I mean, we do get some bad weather up here. I mean, our weather is similar to Cleveland's weather, so 8 of his games are there, where it might be windy sometimes. They're right on the lake. They also the 4 divisional, or the 3 other divisional teams in that division, are all open air stadiums too. So could be some bad weather games. They get snow in November and December. They get some wind there. They get some rain there. So he might be a streamer option in some games, but maybe not one that you're drafting.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily draft him either. He had the 15th most points last year. I do expect their offense to be slightly improved, so maybe he's a top 13 kicker option, so right on the border of being drafted potentially.
He's a K2, huh?
Yeah, he's a kicker too. If you're in one of those highly sought after 2 kicker leagues, I would definitely draft him as a high end kicker too.
He might even be a first round pick in that position.
Yeah, I mean, let's do a kicker-only draft. I'd be down for that. But yeah, I mean, so you already mentioned the weather. That's a big factor as well. He's going to play in some pretty poor climates, so not a guy I'd be targeting in drafts.
All right, and then going into the defense, some good names here. Overall, I think the defense itself is they've kind of been under the radar for the past couple of years. They got some names that you're probably going to want to end up having on your team as far as IDPs go. Myles Garrett, Olivier Vernon. Those are pretty much the top 2. As far as their secondary goes, I hate secondary and IDPs, but I just want to bring them up because for the past 3 years, they've been building early with their secondary. 2018, their first round pick was Denzel Ward. 2019, their second round pick was Greedy Williams. And then 2020, their second round pick was Grant Delpit. So they have a nice young secondary there. All 3 of them are presumed to be the starters from different positions. They did go out and get Andrew Sendejo from Minnesota. He comes over, so he's another safety to look out for. Grant Delpit, I think, has the most value out of the 4 guys that I just mentioned because of his position. He plays a safety position, so he has more tackle opportunity, more sniping those interceptions opportunity there, kind of just picking the ball off from being in the open field. Their linebackers really not really high on any of them. I would probably put Cleveland's defense as a whole maybe in the top half, around 15, 16. I'd probably target the couple players that I mentioned. But really, outside of them, there's not really anything to write home about.
Yeah, and I agree for the most part. I like Grant Delpit quite a bit as well. I think he can be a safety that accumulates a ton of tackles in the NFL. And really, he should have been a first round pick, but he had a poor season at LSU last year. The year before, we were talking about him as a potential first round guy. So he has a ton of talent there. He should be starting most likely from day one. A few other interesting names to me. Myles Garrett, obviously. I mean, he's going to be one of the top defensive linemen IDPs in the entire league. He only played 10 games last year because he's crazy, but he had 10 sacks in those 10 games.
Yeah.
So as of this recording today, he got an enormous contract. So they're really putting a lot into Myles Garrett and building that defense around him. And he's a guy, there's not many guys in the league that have 20 sack potential, but he's one of those guys where if he puts a full season together, he's capable of doing that. So, I mean, whenever I'm scanning a defense and looking for potential IDPs, I'm looking for sacks on their defensive line because that's where you can get value. And I'm looking for tackles from their linebackers. So when you look at their linebacking core, there's just, you kind of tilt your head and go, I have no idea what's going on here. So, I mean, the guys that could provide value, because the reality is somebody's going to have a high volume in terms of tackling on this defense. And that's where I think you can find a lot of value in deep IDP leagues sometimes. A guy like Mac Wilson, who's one of their middle linebackers on the weak side. He had 83 tackles last year, 82 as a rookie. Didn't really start every single game, so that's a pretty impressive numbers for not being the full-time starter. But he's a guy that could have over 100 tackles and really isn't being drafted in IDP leagues next year. So the other guy, I don't know much about him, but usually your middle linebacker is your leader in tackles. Right now, their starting middle linebacker is Sione Takitaki. I really don't know much about him, but to me, when you look at it, if he starts at middle linebacker for him, he's going to have an opportunity to collect tackles. So a guy that, just kind of put him on your watch list, see what he does the first few games. If he's getting 8, 9, 10 tackles, you can say, okay, I'm going to pick this guy up, but I'd add him to your watch list.
All right. So final thoughts on the Browns. Like I said, finished 6-10 last year. I think they might get a little bit of a win improvement this year, maybe up to 7, 8 wins, possibly even in the 9-win range. Pittsburgh is still in that division, and even without Ben Roethlisberger, they were only one game out of the playoffs last year. So, assuming Roethlisberger's healthy, they have one of the better defenses in the entire league. Baltimore, unless teams could figure them out, they're going to be explosive again this year. So, I still could see Cleveland finishing third in the division, a couple more wins than last year, possibly even slip in as a wild card because they did add that seventh wild card.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I mentioned at the beginning, but this is going to be very telling of how successful of a coach Kevin Stefanski is going to be. I mean, this is a roster that has a lot of talent. There's a lot of high first round picks because they've been so terrible for so long. So it's just a matter if he can maximize how well these players play. So I agree. I'd probably have them right at 8 or 9 wins, being competitive for that last wild card. I don't expect them to pass the Ravens or Steelers. The Bengals are kind of interesting. They have one of the easiest schedules this year. So, they could surprise a lot of people. But I still would have the Browns in third with 8 or 9 wins.
All right, so that's it for the Cleveland Browns, and we'll see you guys next episode.